And earlier I spoke to Ian Narev, the new top dog at Australia's biggest bank. Ian Narev, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's quite a result for an incoming chief executive. You obviously just put up your home loan rates by 10 basis points and the term deposits by 20 basis points. What is that going to do to your margins?
Well, in our retail bank, where most of this is most relevant, we've had a 9 basis points fall in margin over this period. And that's really as a result of the fact that deposits have kept getting more expensive as wholesale funding has. And home loan margins have become very challenged. So we expect this to redress that a little bit, but by no means is it going to send the margins soaring northward.
This argument, of course, about rising costs of funds is now well aired, and on the other side, your profits, and in particular your return on equity, still at 19%, is pretty astronomical. And that's true for the big four in Australia, really. NAB is the lowest at the moment at 12%. If you compare this to other banks around the world, I'm just looking, Barclays 7, JP Morgan 11, HSBC 6. Doesn't this say that there is no competition left in Australian banking?
Well, if you look around the world through the financial crisis, the jurisdiction that's most commonly compared with Australia is Canada, because Canadian banks remained well funded, they were prudent, well regulated, etc. And returns on equity in the banking system in Canada are almost identical to returns on equity in the banking system in Australia. You've got CIBC north of 21%, other banks at 18%, 17%. So all the jurisdictions you've talked about are in countries where we know have had real financial turmoil. Canada and Australia haven't, and the returns on equity of banks in those markets are very comparable.
Because for the relatively fragmented markets, there are quite high margins. But for genuinely competitive markets like the United States, for example, margins are now, under 1.5%?
Yeah, I think what you see, for example, in deposit funding, deposit costs have gone up very significantly relative to pre-GFC. We shared some material with that with the media and with investors earlier today, and that is a direct result of competitive forces. So we certainly don't believe that we exist in a market without competition. And
you therefore obviously don't believe that you're now able to put up rates independently of the Reserve Bank, because there aren't those other players that there were around before the GFC, which might have kept you a bit more competitive.
If you look at both the language, the advertising campaigns of all the banks over the last couple of years, the competitive intensity in Australia has stepped up. When we're doing our pricing considerations, we're always having to be cognizant of the competitive responses. And we never sit there and think, well, look, we can do what we like with prices because our competitors are just going to do very similar things. So although there are markets with more players in them, we actually think the Australian market remains competitive.
The jobs front, your predecessor, Ralph Norris, said, I think, that if you need to make big job cuts, then you weren't running the business right. Do you agree with that?
I look at our business today, and I can't comment on any of our competitors and say I think we need to continue to get more productive, but there are ways of doing that that don't involve major redundancies and that don't involve offshoring.
You've stolen the high moral ground on jobs. You've got your 52,000 employees, and you're looking after, obviously, your 800,000 shareholders. What about your customers, both home loan customers, retail customers and business customers?
Well, we've had a commitment for a large number of years now, really since the start of Ralph Norris's time, to put the customers at the centre of everything we do. And while there's a lot of debate about customers' feelings about prices, etc., we do independent research through Roy Morgan in retail banking and DBM in business banking every month. And that's showing us that our retail banking customers, including our home loan customers, have a historic high level of satisfaction with us, that nearly 80% of them are on a scale of 10 saying either 9 or 10 in answer to the question of how satisfied they are with the Commonwealth Bank. So
you had to put up rates because it wasn't profitable before Friday to write a mortgage.
That's right.
Okay. Business customers, and particularly I'd like to ask you about Bankwest, the acquisition which I think you drove back in 2008. Concerns this week in the media about the audit that has been done, Project Magellan, revaluing loans of over 1,000 commercial clients, some by 75%. You've got a few angry customers there.
Yeah, it's important to understand the history that when we bought Bankwest was really struggling. And it was struggling for a couple of reasons. Number one, it didn't have a strong funding base. And number two, it had done a lot of lending, which was not prudent lending, and lending that the Commonwealth Bank certainly wouldn't have done and didn't do in those circumstances. It's one of the things that fueled the growth of Bankwest.
What about the aggressive growth after you'd bought it over in the east that occurred? Wasn't there still quite aggressive lending after that time?
I wouldn't characterise it as aggressive lending. I mean, most of the difficulties we've been working through over a period of time have been as a result of loans that were on the book when we bought the bank. We have, over time, made sure that the lending standards and pricing become prudent, and as a result of that, we've had to work through some difficult situations with some customers.
And what about the court case over in the West, the potential class action around Luke Saraceni, the $500 million Rain Square project?
I really can't comment on any individual cases with any individual customers.
You've put in a new chief, Rob DeLuca, at Bankwest. Is that an acknowledgement that the strategy up until now wasn't working, or you've got a big change coming? Or?
No, on the contrary. I mean, John Sutton did a great job. John's been nearly 3 years there. We had always said when he started it was going to be about 3 years. He moved his family across to Perth for the job. We're very pleased with the job that he's done. The time's now come for him to have a new challenge. We've got another very talented executive who I think is going to do a fabulous job in the role. It's not a sign of a change of strategy, and it's certainly not a sign that we're not happy with performance.
Ian Narev, I hope you have a very good time at the top of Commonwealth Bank.
Thank you very much.